Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing the impact of the Co-op's decision to boycott Israeli produce. The cooperative is the 5th largest supermarket here in Great Britain, and so their decision to boycott Israeli produce has serious implications for Britain. This is an opportunity for Christians now to stand with Israel and the Jewish people to confront this boycott that's been imposed on Israeli goods and produce, which is having a damaging impact on the state of Israel and the Jewish community here in Britain. And this is a panel discussion today, and I'm joined by Tim Gutman by Mordecai Voice, and Luke Akehurst from We Believe in Israel, and Stephen Jaffe from the Northern Ireland Friends of Israel. Gentlemen, welcome to the Middle East Report today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Just to give us a little bit of background, if you can each give us a little bit about your story and how you became involved in Israel advocacy. So if I start off with you, Tim, first.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor of a local church, and I think, you know, I've always had a love for the Jewish people, but I think I got a real passion and a real revelation, if you like, that actually I needed to do something about this, because there was so much noise, if you like, coming from people who hate Israel. And I thought, as a Bible-believing Christian, as somebody who loves the Jewish Saviour Jesus and the Scriptures, I wanted to do something about that. And so I started an organisation called Mordecai Voice.
Excellent. And Luke, do you want to share a little bit about yourself and the organisation you represent?
Yeah, if I start with the organisation, We Believe in Israel was launched last year with a huge conference in London of about 1,500 delegates. So it was the biggest pro-Israel conference there's ever been in the UK. And it brought together a broad coalition of more than 20 different organisations that all support Israel, ranging from Christian Friends of Israel through all the party political friends groups to all the Jewish communal organisations. And our focus is very much on grassroots activity, making sure pressure is put on the political system in the UK by people down at grassroots level. My personal reason for supporting Israel is that I'm very active in the Labour Party, so I've come to this through kind of political analysis of the situation in the Middle East, and I've been a supporter of Israel for over 20 years, since I started working with people from the Union of Jewish Students when I was a student activist back in the early 90s.
Excellent. And Stephen, you know, you've been on the Middle East Report a few times, so you're very familiar with the setup here and stuff as well. But if you would remind our viewers about your role in the Jewish community and how you've become so active on behalf of Israel.
Well, thank you, Simon. Firstly, before I launch in, thank you so much, both to yourself and to Revelation TV, for devoting a programme to something which I think we all believe is a very important topic. I'm a member of the Jewish community. I grew up in Belfast in Northern Ireland, where the Jewish community is absolutely tiny. We have 80 individuals, members of our community. Growing up in Northern Ireland, which was a place of conflict and which has come through that conflict, I think there is a tremendous interest in the Middle East. And I co-chair a group called the Northern Ireland Friends of Israel, and we bring together Jews, Christians, secular people, people of all faiths and none, who believe that Israel's case should be put reasonably and fairly to the people of Northern Ireland. And through the work that I've done in Northern Ireland, I'm now working through the Board of Deputies, which is the representative body for the Jewish community in the UK. And my job is really to engage the Jewish community and its friends in terms of support for Israel.
Excellent. Luke, I said in the intro that we're discussing the Co-op's plan and decision to boycott Israeli produce. Can you tell us the story behind the decision by the Co-op to impose this boycott on Israeli produce?
This is an unfortunate consequence of the Co-op having a completely different ownership structure to every other supermarket. So Co-op's not privately owned, it's owned by its members, which are basically the people that shop there. If you shop regularly at the Co-op, you get offered membership and you pay £1, and that gives you a say in the Co-op's decision making. And sadly, a small group of very politically motivated people who oppose Israel and want to damage it have used the democratic meeting structures and decision-making structures of the co-op to get in there and to propose resolutions in favour of a boycott. And this year, there was already a boycott of settlement produce. This year, there was a threat of a kind of wider boycott, and the top-level committee in the co-op, its group board, decided to extend their boycott to all of the produce from 4 big Israeli companies that work in the settlements. So they're now boycotting things that are produced nowhere near the settlements at all. The figures I've heard is way over 90% of the produce of these 4 companies comes from Israel inside the 1967 borders, but all of it is being boycotted under this new policy.
And Stephen, what do you make of the decision by the co-op to boycott Israeli produce, considering that they are the 5th largest supermarket here in the UK? What impact does this have on Israel and the Jewish community if this decision is not opposed?
Well, to give you some idea of perspective, and I think it's important to maintain some perspective on this, trade between the UK and Israel last year hit £4 billion. The value of the business which the co-op is boycotting is said to be £350,000. Now, in that context, you might say, well, why bother? What's the problem? The fact is that it is much more harmful, I think, to the Jewish community in the UK than it is to the Israeli economy. And to explain that, I would like to take viewers back really to the history of the Jewish people. There is no time that the Jewish people have not been boycotted in our history going back through the Middle Ages. And of course it was a very prominent feature of the Nazi period, the boycott of Jewish businesses. Now the co-op will say, well, this has nothing to do with us, this is a very political decision, but we must ask them, what other countries in the world are they currently boycotting? It is only Israel. And I think from my point of view, and it's a very personal answer as a Jewish person, it marginalises me, it ghettoises me, it says we're beyond civilised debate. When you boycott something or somebody, it is really saying, these people are beyond the pale. And what makes Israel different? Why are they boycotting Israel, the Jewish state, and not any other country? From the perspective of the Jewish community in this country, I believe it's an extremely offensive decision.
And Tim, what's your reaction to Co-op's decision to boycott Israeli produce?
Yeah, I mean, it was just like Stephen was saying. I mean, it's as a Christian, I think it's very worrying that this kind of thing happens, and we've not, it's not been challenged yet, but we hope it will be, and B, what kind of message is it sending to the Jewish community in this nation, but also from a Christian perspective, scripturally, biblically, I know this doesn't please God. I know, my conviction, what I know from the Bible, is that it pleases God when we bless His people. I mean, God loves His people, He always will forever. And this kind of thing can only, I think, isolate us further from God's will, from God's agenda for us as a nation, for His church in this nation. And that kind of thing is truly alarming, like you said at the beginning. I mean, the impact, I think, will be huge spiritually, but also has an impact in every area of national life. I'm worried, yeah. The 5th largest, boycotting. As Stephen mentioned, there's so many evil things going on in the world. In the Arab Spring, for example, so many people being mistreated. In China, still human rights have not been, strongly addressed by organisations. And still, as soon as Israel is mentioned in some circles, it's people want to boycott, people want to isolate, people want to accuse, and it's disturbing.
We've got a clip to go to now that looks at some of the activities carried out by the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign in trying to force Israeli produce off supermarkets, and these are the lengths that they'll go to.
You're going to go in and basically steal things from Tesco's.
I wouldn't call it stealing. I would call it citizen seizure, rather like a citizen's arrest. If the law is being broken and there is no professional member of the law forces around to do anything about it, it's up to the citizen to see that the law is maintained and respected.
So how will you be upkeeping the law by doing what you're going to do?
Well, these goods that we will be taking are labelled West Bank. They come from illegal settlements in illegally occupied Palestine. And it's not just me saying it's illegal. Our government has undersigned the Geneva Conventions and the UN resolutions which declare it illegal. The International Court has also supported those decisions. Apart from illegality, land's still being stolen every day, Palestinians are still being killed.
Well, we have seized unlawful goods that have been on sale in Tesco's. They're labelled West Bank, but they're actually coming from illegal settlements that have been on the illegal occupied territories of Palestine in the West Bank. What's happened there is people have been evicted from their homes have been demolished, the ancient olive groves that are thousands of years old have been uprooted, and all the water has been appropriated to grow these illegal goods. And it's an absolute disgrace that Tesco's are selling them at all. And we're calling on people here, please boycott. It's a national boycott of Israeli goods, and we're really hoping that you will support the people of Palestine. As you can see, they're clearly labelled West Bank. The West Bank is a legally occupied territory in Palestine. It's actually Palestinian, and these are illegally grown on the settlements there. It's a disgrace. It's a sin considering what the Palestinian people have been through. Please don't buy Israeli goods. This is an appeal to the people of Wales to support the national boycott of Israeli goods. Particularly look out for ones labelled the West Bank, because that's the illegal settlements in Palestine, and it's totally illegal, unlawful under international law. They're breaking all UN conventions, the Geneva law, just check it out. That's why we feel so strongly about it today.
Hello and welcome back to the Middle East Report. It just shows you the lengths that some people will go to get their message across, even getting arrested. We've got a statement here from the co-op, primarily because it's very important that we get a statement from the co-op to understand their reasoning and the decision why they've decided to boycott Israeli goods. And this is from Michelle Henderson. She is the Public Relations Manager for the Food and Farming, the cooperative group. It says here that a spokesperson for the cooperative group said that the cooperative group, which has not taken any produce from Israeli settlements in the Palestinian occupied territory since 2009, is extending its policy to cover engagement with any produce suppliers known to be sourcing from Israeli settlements, where there is a broad international consensus that settlements are illegal. This follows a decision by the group's board, which was mindful of additional costs involved in the trading and auditing of all produce supplied by these companies. Following audit of the group's supply chain, it will no longer do business with 4 companies, amounting to £350,000 worth of sales, as there is evidence they are sourced from Israeli settlements in Palestinian occupied territories. However, the group will continue to trade with Israeli suppliers that do not source from the settlements, and currently has supply agreements with some 20 Israeli businesses, a number of which may benefit from a transfer of trade. The group will also continue to actively work to increase links with Palestinian businesses in the occupied territories. Luke, what do you make of that statement by the co-op?
I'll be interested to see the proof in the pudding of whether they do actually transfer trade to other Israeli companies, and it just seems to be, it's punishing these companies and singling them out, and it's gone far beyond their original policy. I wouldn't support it, but I can understand the logic of it, that they didn't want to trade in settlement goods, and it's basically kind of making excuse for the fact that they don't seem to be able to monitor where the produce is coming from. So they're doing this blanket ban on everything that those 4 companies produce, which is going to hurt not just people in the settlements. It's going to hurt Palestinian workers that travel into the settlements to work. I understand that there's tens of thousands of them. It's potentially going to involve a boycott of goods that are produced by Palestinians in the rest of the West Bank, which are exported through one of those 4 companies, and it's going to hurt farmers in Israel within the 1967 borders who export through those companies as well. So the whole thing is a very blunt instrument. And I think that the co-op should be more honest and say they've done this because they're kowtowing to a very vocal minority, and they haven't listened to the wider group of consumers. There's about 6 million members or consumers in the co-op, and I'm pretty sure that most of them are not interested in this kind of boycott, and instead they've listened to a small minority that have shouted. And as you've seen in the video clip you just showed, people that are prepared to take quite extreme actions to get their ideas on the agenda.
And Stephen, also, isn't this boycott of Israeli produce actually counterproductive? Primarily because so many Palestinians are employed by these Israeli agricultural firms that give these Palestinian jobs and an income that can support their families. And surely by introducing these boycotts, actually it's going to hurt the Palestinians far more than it will the Israelis.
I think that's a very good point, Simon. You have to look beyond the numbers who are actually working in Israeli companies. It's their families, it's their dependents. It actually runs into, as Luke said, tens of thousands of people. And if you look at the organisations in Palestinian society that call for the boycott, they are not popular organisations. They are highly politicised organisations, mostly based in Ramallah. When you actually speak to Palestinians beyond those organisations, you hear a very mixed message about support for the boycott. They will say to you, we may not agree with the settlements as Palestinians, however, we do not want people to be boycotted because tens of thousands of our people rely on it for their livelihoods. And that argument the co-op has completely ignored. And I want to reiterate what Luke said, because the statement that you read out is as if they were acting in isolation, that they themselves have come to this decision. But actually it's part of a worldwide boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign, and the people who are behind that campaign are not interested in the welfare of the Palestinians. It is to a very large extent an anti-Israel campaign. It's run by people from the hard left in many places, and I'm afraid that they are going to have to, bear in mind the consequences of their actions on the Palestinians themselves.
And Tim, what concerns me particularly is how the Jewish settlers in Judea and Samaria have been singled out. It's almost as if you if you follow the mainstream media, if you follow our parliamentarians in Britain, also President Obama in the United States, you would think that the biggest obstacle to peace and security in the Middle East is the Jewish settlers. Ignoring the Iranian nuclear threat, and ignoring the threat of terrorism that stems from the Middle East from groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and even Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula, also ignores the dangers of the Arab Spring that's turned into the Arab Winter with the rise of dangerous Islamic extremist organisations across the Middle East, even the Muslim Brotherhood on the verge of power in Egypt, and also doesn't really address either the huge problems of the economy in the Arab world or the situation regarding poverty. But it seems to be that the Jewish settlers are the ones that are singled out. Why do you believe this is the case?
I mean, for me, it's as you mentioned, with everything that's going on in the world, with Iran, with the Spring, and as soon as a Jew wants to build a house in a disputed area, it's like the whole world thinks, this Jew is the obstacle to world peace. It's, for me, just to be straight, I believe the root is anti-Semitism. And it's like Stephen mentioned, it's nothing new. It's been happening since, well, we know, for thousands of years. And it's the same kind of thing that was happening during the Middle Ages, you know, in the Nazi Germany. For me, it feels very, very dark, I feel very uncomfortable when I see, like in that clip, they get so passionate. But for me, I'm really passionate about Israel. I love the Jewish people. I love Israel for many reasons. But I don't hate the Palestinian people. I have a passion for Israel. But their passion seems to be rooted in hate. You know, their passion is an anti-Israel passion as opposed to a passion for. So for me, it's very dark, very uncomfortable. I don't fear them because I know, you know, I know God is. I believe in justice and what's right, and I believe that God is, you know, is with His people. But for me, it's very dark, very sinister. And I believe as Christians, as the church, we've got to wake up and recognise it for what it is, plain anti-Semitism.
And look, the decision by the co-op to boycott Israeli produce seems to be part of a wider campaign to delegitimise Israel through groups like the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, groups like the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Campaign. It's to encourage hostile attitudes towards Israel and the Jewish people rather than actually defending the rights of the Palestinians.
That's right. I think, yeah, there are serious people on both sides of the Middle East conflict and throughout the world who really want peace in the Middle East and are looking at how you achieve that and how do you get to a two-state solution where the aspirations of the Jewish people to a homeland are recognised and the aspirations of the Palestinians to a national homeland are recognised. But some of the people involved in this kind of campaigning don't seem to be interested in that kind of a peaceful outcome. And one of the big symbolic things behind that is the logo of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which is a map of the whole of what was the British mandate in Palestine before 1947-48, all coloured in as though it's one country. So they're looking at the removal of Israel as a state, and you get that whenever you see a pro-Palestinian demonstration, very often they start chanting "Palestine shall be free from the river to the sea," which implies everything from the Med to the River Jordan would be Palestine. There would be no state of Israel anymore, and that's not an attitude that's about peace. And the delegitimisation campaign is almost like a kind of third stage of the attempt to rub out the state of Israel. So first of all, you had military action, and there were 4 conventional wars fought between Israel and its Arab neighbours in the period up to 1973, each of which Israel emerged as the winner in. So that failed. And then you had the 2 intifadas, so kind of guerrilla uprisings and use of terrorist violence, and that failed largely because the Israelis brought in the security barrier, which stopped a lot of the suicide bombings. So now they moved to a new battlefield, which is an attempt to use international legal forums and the boycott movement to remove Israel's legitimacy as a state. And I think that's so pernicious when it's the only state in the world that's a Jewish state that's being picked on in this way. There aren't other times that people are unhappy with the behaviour of a country. They don't try and remove its legitimacy or its right to exist. And I think particularly when it is the only Jewish state, we have to be really concerned about some of the motives that are behind that.
Yeah. And Stephen, do you believe the co-op is very naive and very ignorant of Israel's history, primarily because the State of Israel was founded upon the cooperative movement? It was the cooperative farms such as the kibbutz and the moshavs that actually built the Jewish state, and Israel today has kibbutz and moshavs in operations that farm Israeli produce, where the ownership of the production is in the hands of the workers.
Again, a very good point, Simon. My introduction to Israel was as a volunteer on a kibbutz program, and there you saw cooperative values in everyday life, the idea of a community sharing what it had in terms of collective values. The cooperative movement in Israel has a lot to teach the world in terms of cooperative values. I understand that the Israeli cooperative movement has been in touch with its sister organisation in the UK. It's pleaded with them not to take this boycott action. we all think that really what should be happening in the cooperative movement should be positive engagement. It should be encouraging cooperatives in the Arab community, cooperatives in the Jewish community, collaborating with each other, cooperating with each other. If the UK co-op movement was involved in that, then everyone, I think, every reasonable person would say that is good, that's something worth supporting. But instead, you see the UK co-op movement, in effect, turning around to its Israeli counterpart and shunning it, and I think that's entirely wrong.
And Tim, when we think of the co-op as a brand, we think of ethnical banking, we think of fair trade, but surely this boycott of Israeli produce is going to damage their image and their branding amongst ordinary people.
Yeah, it's got to, because it's, as we've discussed, it's so unethical, it's so immoral, it's so unjust. I mean, as you mentioned, the co-op have, they have flown the flag for fair trade and ethical practices, but this is completely the opposite, shooting themselves in the foot. And I mean, for me, for example, when I learnt of this in 2009, we've got a co-op down the road. As soon as I learnt this, I'd rather travel, 7 miles to Tesco now, because for me, it's so unfair, it's so unethical, so opposite of what they're trying to portray. For me, it's a completely self-defeating. It's like I said, it's sinister.
We've got a clip to go to now that looks at those behind the whole BDS movement, the boycott, divestments and sanctions that are targeting Israel. And this is a clip that really shows their true agenda and their true colours.
The Palestinian cause has long been synonymous with violence, terrorism, and Islamic fundamentalism. A new generation of pro-Palestinian activists are working to change that image. These young, eloquent speakers, educated in Western universities, are making the rounds on news programs.
Violence only begets more violence.
And on university campuses, advocating their vision for Palestine.
We advocate rights.
They're part of the BDS movement.
Boycott, divestment and sanctions movement.
And their message is clear.
We need to boycott Israel.
No one should buy Israeli products.
They invoke humanist, progressive and socialist values.
Equality, freedom and dignity.
Justice in Palestine.
A democratic movement based on the struggle for human rights.
And aim to garner the support of students, trade unionists,
The resistance of the Palestinian people only.
and even Jewish civil rights activists. BDS is particularly vigilant against any form of Palestinian-Israeli collaboration.
The end of a collaborationist Palestinian leadership.
In January 2010, Palestinian and Israeli filmmakers joined together to produce a series of films for the 13th annual Tel Aviv University Film Festival. Murad Nasser is a Palestinian director.
It is impressive of Tel Aviv University to bring Palestinian directors. This way we can use art to reach for peace, using artistic and cinematic projects.
The BDS leadership quickly denounced this collaboration and imposed a Palestinian boycott. In 2008, the Palestinian and Israeli trade unions signed a historic cooperation agreement. Shahar Saeed, General Secretary of the Palestinian Trade Union, praised the agreement for promoting the rights of Palestinian workers. BDS leadership, however, was outraged.
I don't understand in the TUC how we continue to associate ourselves with...
Saeed was promptly forced to retract his statements and denounced any possible cooperation. Palestinian Al-Quds University signed a statement of academic collaboration with Israel's Hebrew University, committing to a pursuit of knowledge through cooperation rather than boycotts. Al-Quds University President Sari Nusseibeh explains.
It's very important, in fact, to create tolerance, pluralism, the ability to listen to the other, and this can be done through this kind of education.
Yet last year, under pressure from the BDS movement,
sever your collaborations, do not go to academic meetings, do not...
The university's board severed all ties with Israeli academic institutions.
Maybe the only way to get at peace is through having cooperation.
It's extremely important an institutional boycott of Israeli academic and cultural institutions.
Incidentally, Omar is a student at Tel Aviv University. The moderates, Israelis, Palestinians, doctors, academics, artists, and peace activists, are in fact the principal victims of this self-labeled progressive social movement. What is it about Israeli-Palestinian collaboration that so threatens BDS? Moderates have been working towards a peaceful solution to the conflict since the 90s, under the guidelines of the widely accepted two-state solution.
The only resolution is for the aspirations of both sides to be met through two states, where Israelis and Palestinians each live in peace and security.
Cet accord permettra aux deux peuples de vivre côte à côte dans la paix et la sécurité.
A two-state solution.
And that's the only solution to this issue.
Two states, where Israelis and Palestinians each live in peace and security.
I clearly do not buy into the two-state solution. I clearly do not buy into the two-state solution.
The two-state solution, as typically expressed, is nothing more than a last-ditch plan to save Zionism.
So BDS isn't about peaceful coexistence or ending the occupation.
If the occupation ends, let's say, would that end your call for BDS? No, it wouldn't.
No. BDS moves beyond ending the occupation to place demands for what they term the right of return, the relocation of millions of Palestinians from around the world into Israel.
This is the most basic, fundamental right that we cannot negotiate away. This is something that we cannot compromise on.
The right of return would extinguish Israel as a Jewish state, and that's not an option.
This implication is not lost on Barghouti.
If the refugees were to return, you would not have a two-state solution. You'll have a Palestine next to a Palestine, rather than a Palestine next to Israel.
Yes, a one-state solution means the end of Zionism.
Or as BDS activist Ronnie Casseroles puts it, BDS will help bring about the defeat of Zionist Israel and victory for Palestine. These statements irrevocably shatter the veneer of progressive liberal language to reveal the true nature of BDS, a venomous, deceitful, anti-peace, anti-coexistence movement that will settle for nothing short of the annihilation of the Jewish state.
We don't get fooled again.
Hello and welcome back to the Middle East Report. As you saw there, this whole movement to delegitimize the Jewish state has sinister and a very, very nasty agenda, in which the agenda is not about promoting peace and cooperation, but really wanting to work for the destruction of the State of Israel by creating one single Palestinian entity, in which is now the modern State of Israel. I want to come back to you, Luke, particularly with the Co-op's decision, really, in their statement, where they refer to the Palestinian occupied territories. Now, isn't it under international law considered disputed territories? And also, how can they claim that this is actually Palestinian occupied territories when Israel's entered into peace negotiations with Fatah back in 2003, and so many of that territory now is actually under the ownership and the control of the Palestinian Authority?
Yeah, I mean that's correct. That the West Bank that is divided into 3 areas of status, so a large slice of it is actually administered by the Palestinians themselves. You're legally correct that it's not occupied territory. It's disputed because the Jordanians, whose territory it was pre the 1967 Six-Day War, no longer have any claim to it. So there's no one who it's being occupied from. In the other bit of occupied territory, Gaza is no longer occupied at all because Israel, perhaps to its regret, unilaterally withdrew from it in a bid to try and speed up the peace process. Yeah, you're right. There's some of the semantics. The co-op is claiming things are absolute certainties in the language that they're using when actually there are people on the other side of the debate that would dispute that. But even if everything that they were saying was absolutely legally watertight, still the action that they've taken does nothing to advance peace. It's putting a wedge between people, not bringing them together. And actually the kind of things that will bring peace between Israel and the Palestinians are greater economic cooperation. It's Israelis and Palestinians working together on the same farms or the same cooperatives and the same industry, and their economies being so intertwined that they both prosper and that they don't have an incentive to fight each other. So this kind of policy of demonising Israel and treating the conflict as though there's one side that's totally good and one side that's totally bad, it just increases antipathy between the two peoples. It's really not the way in which anyone that's serious about peace in the region would want to be going.
I really want to bring you into this conversation as well, Stephen, is that surely the cooperative movement, by wanting to place such a boycott on Israeli produce, and I think there's only one area that they dispute, and that's Morocco, and ignoring all the other problems in the rest of the world, aren't they damaging themselves? Because after this program and after so much awareness throughout the Jewish community of what the co-op is doing, surely this will mean that many Jewish people and also Christians will stop buying goods from the co-op and stop banking with the co-op.
Absolutely, and you're quite right, it's beyond the Jewish community. I want to tell you a wonderful story from one of our supporters of the Northern Ireland Friends of Israel. He totted up that he was buying about £2,000 worth of products from the co-op. He used it for his family's main shop, he bought his petrol there, etc. He went into the local co-op, he spoke to the manager, he said, you know, this policy doesn't represent me. I haven't been consulted in it. I will not continue to trade with you while this policy continues. His name is Grant, and I very much hope he's watching this programme. I salute that. I think that is tremendously important. We're not calling for an all-out boycott of the co-op. We're not playing the boycott game. But if people feel that you know, there are other outlets in the high street, if they feel that the way that the co-op has taken this issue is not how they feel, that they haven't been consulted in it, even if they are a member of the co-op, then I would say yes, you know, we should seriously consider that taking that action.
And Tim, how should Christians respond to this, and how is Mordecai Voice in particular responding to this co-op boycott of Israeli produce?
Absolutely. I mean, for a start, the least we could do is write letters and make it aware that there's a big chunk of us that are really unhappy, that can see what's going on, the sinister events that are taking place. Secondly, there's, I mean, I would tend to say if they're going to boycott Israeli goods, where I'm coming from, well, let's boycott co-op then. But, you know, that's just me. I'm a bit more that way inclined. I mean, yeah, let's not shop at co-op until and let them know and feel that we are actually there's a big chunk of us as Christians and Jews in this country, and those with no faith as well. But there's a big chunk of us that feel really strongly about this. And just because, you know, we're not doing the kind of things we saw in the first clip, we're not getting arrested outside Tesco, doesn't mean we don't feel strongly, because we do. And I think for Mordecai Voice, I mean, we're planning some stands this year. You know, we want to go down and let it be seen and heard that we love Israel. Maybe this is one of the issues that we need to stand against. If this boycott, divestment, and if it carries on as it's going, it can only get bad, as you know, as we mentioned earlier, for me, it can only be bad for this nation, and so I want to do something about that. So, for Mordecai Voice perspective, please watch your space, because we are going to be doing something in 2012.
Okay, glad to hear it. And Luke, as well, you are very much heading up one of the leaders in this campaign to really counter the boycott by co-ops. For many of our viewers who are very, very concerned and disheartened by the co-op's decision to boycott Israeli goods, what are you planning to do, and how can our viewers get involved in this campaign?
Okay, well, there's a number of things people can do. As we mentioned, people should write to the co-op, and they should look on the co-op's website, find out who the group board members are for their region, because those are the people that took the decision. Write to them and tell them about your disquiet about this. Don't, you know, not angry kind of green ink letters, well thought out, rational, explanations of why this is the wrong way for the co-op to go. We're putting together a petition about this, and people can get copies of that by contacting me through our website, which is webelieveinisrael.org.uk. So if you just send me an email through the form on that and ask for petition forms, and then if you do stop using the co-op, don't just stop. Make sure you go in and talk to the local manager of the co-op bank or co-op supermarket, and tell them why you're not using them anymore, so that gets fed back through their management chain. And then the other thing you can do is actually engage in the co-op's democratic structures, because that's how this happened, is because the opponents of Israel got stuck in there and involved in the internal democracy of the co-op. So you can join for just £1 on the co-op's website. That gives you the opportunity to vote in their internal elections and turn up to their meetings. I'm very pleased that the round of regional meetings that's just coming to an end, it wasn't a one-sided debate. There were people, Jewish supporters of Israel, but because a lot of the meetings are on the Shabbat, a lot of non-Jewish supporters, particularly people from Christian Friends of Israel, that stood up and really took these arguments on, and made the co-op officials that were there realise this was not a one-sided debate. I think they had a real shock when they discovered that there were people who were co-op members who were deeply, deeply unhappy and disquieted by this. So there's a whole range of different ways in which you can engage in this. But we really, I think it's got to the point with the boycott movement that we have to draw in a line in the sand, and fight this at a grassroots level. It can't be just allowed to roll on, because first it was the unions, then it was some of the church groups like the Quakers and the Methodists, then it's the co-op. What will it be next? One of the big political parties or some other civil society organisation? And we can't let Britain become the kind of hub of this boycott movement. We've got a moral responsibility to defend Israel as the thriving democracy in the Middle East and the homeland of the Jewish people. We need to stand up for it and stop this kind of nonsense.
Yeah. Simon, if I could just add to that, as a member of the Jewish community, I want to say a tremendous thank you to our friends outside the community, particularly in the Christian world, who are standing by us. There's been some tremendous indications of that in recent months. There's been Christian events standing for Israel in places like Cardiff and Belfast, where I'm from. People have come out in their hundreds, and a tribute to Tim as well and the work that he's done, particularly at Westminster. For the Jewish community, which is quite small in this country and also quite localised, Jewish community tends to be concentrated in certain areas of London or Manchester. It is tremendously important, tremendously significant for us to see people from outside our community standing with us. So just an opportunity really for me as a member of the Jewish community to say a huge thank you.
No, it's a pleasure. I think it's our duty to stand with Israel and the Jewish people, and particularly when we see injustice such as this boycott that is not even fair to the Palestinians themselves, and they're the ones that are going to suffer from this as well. So, we all have a moral responsibility to get involved, to defend Israel, to defend the Jewish people. By doing so, we're defending our Judean Christian heritage here in Britain and here in the West. Also concerns me, guys, about this co-op decision is that this is part of a wider movement of boycotting Israel. And we've seen that, for example, Monty Crystal, who is an Israeli expert in conflict resolution, was banned last month from speaking at the NHS conference in Manchester. And also there's a boycott in an Israeli theatre group at the National Globe Theatre to take place at the end of May. If this is not stopped, what are the implications for Israel and the Jewish community here in Britain? Either of you. Well,
I think we're getting into some very, very dark territory, as Tim said. The idea that this guy, Motti Crystal, who's actually an expert in resolving conflicts, would be personally banned from speaking at something as innocuous as an NHS management training day, that is actually racist. To ban someone on the basis of the fact that they're an Israeli is nothing. He's not a representative of the Israeli state. He's just an Israeli citizen who, for all given what his job is, one assumes has quite liberal views on the peace process. And the idea that when people are going to a Shakespeare festival to see a world-renowned Israeli theatre company, Habima, and that's being disrupted, that kind of cultural event is being disrupted, that's dreadful.
Yeah, which is very, very troubling. And where's it going to lead? Because, I mean, we only have to look at history to understand the nature of boycotts. Once Israeli businesses are boycotted, once the Jewish communities then become boycotted, we see persecution.
Simon, I think there's a very important principle that what begins as being against the Jews never ends with being against the Jews. And I think this is a message for Christians. Stand with the Jews on this, not just for your love of the Jewish people, but also for yourselves and your right to believe in what you believe, because believe me, what starts as being anti-Israel and anti-Jewish will extend to those who consider themselves to be friends of Israel, and you will find your right to worship the way that you do, your right to believe what you want to believe coming under attack. So I would say to people of all faiths out there and of none that what is it? It begins as an attack against the Jewish people, very rarely ends there.
And also, Luke, what's been the political reaction? I know that you're very closely involved in the Labour Party. What has been the reaction of our MPs regarding this boycott by Co-op?
I don't think there's enough knowledge of it yet. There's an early day motion supporting the boycott that a Lib Dem MP, Bob Russell, has put forward. Thankfully, that's got very few signatures, but there hasn't been enough of a parliamentary response to say this is inappropriate yet. And an obvious group of people that we need to talk to are the MPs who are sponsored by the cooperative group's sister organisation, the Cooperative Party, because some of those are extremely brave, high-profile supporters of Israel, who I think if we start to educate them about what's going on in their sister organisation, they will be able to be ambassadors for us and to go to the rest of the co-op movement and say that it's heading in the wrong direction. So there's an absolute job of work that needs to be done. The initial response, because we had these regional co-op meetings, the initial response we looked at has been a grassroots one, but we need to look at tackling this in Westminster as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to add to what the guys were saying earlier, I think when it comes to things like this, like Stephen said, first, we're seeing it against Israel and the Jewish people, but where will it end? I mean, it started like that in Nazi Germany. It started, Kristallnacht, and it got worse and worse. But also, I always say to the Christians, to the church at home who are listening, is all that hatred which is directed against the Jewish people in Israel. It's like if they got their way, and when they say, from the river to the sea, and driving Israel into the sea, if they got their way, then where would their hatred be directed then? It's like, almost like Israel is like this shield that, I think Christians have to stand with them, stand with the Jewish people, because of the very nature of hatred, and it's very sinister. And it's a simple question which I just want to ask people is, why do you, where's your passion stem from? What is your problem with a Jewish state? What is the issue here? Why do you have such a passion against a Jewish state? And I just want people to look inside themselves and analyse and just see that it's not rational. It's not. You can't explain it. For me, it's just anti-Semitism. And I think we've got to do something as the church. We've got to be heard.
But also, it's also one of the problems we face, isn't it, is one of perception. I mean, at the moment, the Palestinian Authority has entered into a government of national unity with Hamas. Hamas, on their covenant charter, call not only for the destruction of the Jewish state, but also for genocide against the Jewish people worldwide, and would all, if they had a chance, would call for another Holocaust. And where's the boycotts there? Where's the calling for the boycotts there? We've seen the oppression by Hamas on the people living in Gaza, the implementation of Sharia law. We witness a huge increase in persecution by these Islamist groups on Palestinian Christians, that so many of them are fleeing places like Bethlehem and other places, primarily because the persecution's getting so loud. But where have these anti-Israel voices are so quiet on issues like this?
Well, I think if anyone from the co-op national board is watching this programme, what I would say to them is that their statement has said that they wish to increase trade with the Palestinians. I am for trade, I am for prosperity, because I think that is extremely important in encouraging peace. But you have you've said a very important point, because the situation regarding Hamas is that it is an illegal organisation, and there is international consensus that its armed wing is terrorist, that it has its assets frozen across Europe, and yet the Co-op is doing nothing to investigate the sourcing of produce from the Palestinian sector to see whether there is any connection with Hamas. It is an entirely one-sided point of view which they have taken. So I agree entirely, Simon, with what you said.
Okay, we're down to the last 2 minutes, so I'll give you a minute each, or less than a minute each. Starting with you, Luke, is there a message you've got for our viewers who are watching?
Yeah, really, it's don't just watch this and be concerned or angry. We need people to actually do something. So let your local co-op, the management of your local co-op store or bank know about your concerns about this. Write to the guys on the group board, ask us for petitions and get those signed, and engage in the co-op's democratic structures to try and reverse this policy this time next year when they review it.
Okay. Tim, sorry, you've got 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Yeah, I mean, just to say, I really believe, you know, when we do something, love is action. The Bible says that, you know, and what good is love if we don't do anything? Keep praying, keep believing, but also check out what we can do to be active. Check out organisations like Christian Friends of Israel, ICEJ, Bridges for Peace, etc. Sorry if I missed anyone out. But just see what you can do, and let's be heard, because I know it pleases God. I really know it's close to God's heart, because they're his people. Our Saviour is Jewish. The scriptures, we owe them so much, and it's time for action.
Gentlemen, I just want to thank you very much for all of you joining me on the Middle East Report today to discuss the Co-op's bad and ill-informed decision to boycott Israeli produce. And I want to thank you all for watching today's Middle East Report. It was a special programme because we had a panel discussion. It starts with boycotts, but it doesn't finish with boycotts. And this is why Christians, you have an opportunity really now, today, to stand with Israel and the Jewish people. You can see that here, Britain's 5th biggest supermarket chain has decided to boycott Israeli produce. And we know in Genesis it says, those who bless Israel, I will bless, and those who curse Israel, I will curse. And surely this will bring a curse upon the Co-op movement, which is not a good thing. So therefore, we have an opportunity to raise our voices and get active on behalf of Israel. And so we're going to leave you with this song for you to reflect upon the beauty and the majesticness of the State of Israel.
שבעה כוכבי לכת צצים על כל גבעה איפה אותה ארץ כוכבי אותה גבעה מי ינחנו דרך יגיד לי הנתיבה כבר עברנו כמה מדבר watch